그렇게 봅니다.
Back to our top story now, the synagogue fire in Melbourne. There has been a big bipartisan show of support there. Not only have members of the congregation gathered there, we've heard from police this morning as well. We've had Labor MPs and Liberal MPs there. We're going to hear from James Patterson now, and he has a number of his fellow MPs behind him. Labor MP Josh Burner, as I mentioned, and a number from the congregation that we heard before. Let's listen in.
Tim Wilson, the candidate for Goldstein, Benson Solo, the candidate for McNamara, and a number of community leaders who might like to make some statements as well. I just want to first say here on behalf of the Federal Coalition that what happened this morning to the Adus Synagogue is totally and utterly unacceptable. It has no place in Australia. And everybody should work with the police to help them make sure that they can get to the bottom of this, and for decisive and serious action to be taken against the alleged perpetrators of this incident. We must send a message as a country after the last year that actions like this have consequences, that people will not get away with this kind of behaviour, that in Australia we do not tolerate violence against religious centres like the synagogue behind us. Because if this behaviour continues to be tolerated, this will get worse. There will be more incidents like this, and next time someone will be hurt. That is something that should have no place in Australia, something we should all agree cannot and should not happen. I now invite Daniel Aggie on to step up and say a few words on behalf of Josh Burns, who's lost his voice.
Josh unfortunately has lost his voice. I'm going to read this statement. I do so mindful of the fact that I have representatives of both the government and the coalition, and I wish to say on behalf of the community, the Australian Jewish community, we recognise and are grateful for the bipartisan presence and bipartisan support. Josh's statement is as follows. Adus is a proud and peaceful community, built on Holocaust survivors who came to Australia looking for a peaceful home. The synagogue behind us is the centre of Jewish life, of learning and spirituality. I've been inside many times, and to see it burnt today is devastating. The attack was a disgrace and extremely dangerous. The rise in anti-Semitism in Australia is shocking, and it needs to stop. I'm standing here with James because we need to confront this together. I hope those injured make a full recovery, and may those who committed the crime feel the full force of the law. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. David?
I wanted to firstly begin by recognising the Adus community that are with us today, and to say to them, we are with you, and the incident that you've seen, we've all seen, has no place, absolutely no place here in Melbourne, in the heart of Melbourne's Jewish community. And for over 12 months now, the Jewish community have had to deal with targeted attacks, hate, incitement, anti-Semitism, and unfortunately there has not been consequences. And no one, unfortunately, would have ever expected that it would have got to this. But I've got to say, we need more than words, we need action. We need action from all governments. We cannot have what's happened here today happen to anybody of any faith, of any background. Victoria has always been the great multicultural state. That is what we have been proud of. That is what we have always championed. But this today is an absolute disgrace. It's a disgrace. Our community is broken, our community is shaken, and our community deserves action. No more words, our community deserves action. Where are the consequences? And I would say, and I wanted to thank Victoria Police for how quickly they've stepped in, but once we catch the perpetrators, there needs to be action and consequences for what they have done. There also needs to be proper security for our community going forward. This is the eve of the Sabbath, where many of our community will be out and about with their families and with their loved ones, and should not have to be hiding. Our community should not have to hide. No community should not have to hide. But unfortunately, that's what it has come to. And that is what the government has allowed to happen. The government should have the community's backs, not turn their back on the community, and that's what we have seen. It is not good enough. It is not good enough, and the government must act, and the government must act now.
Just very quickly, any community leaders want to make any statements? If not, we will take some questions.
James, what response would you like to see from Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton, like bipartisanship on this?
Well, I see the Prime Minister's put a statement out this morning. That's very welcome. What we need to see is consequences for those who are responsible. Peter Dutton and I have been calling for 12 months or more to make sure that there are very serious consequences for people engaging in this behaviour. If you can protest in the streets with a Hezbollah flag or a Hamas logo and no one is charged and no one is arrested and no one's sent to jail, then unfortunately the extremists that we do have in our community will become emboldened, and we need to see decisive action to punish the perpetrators for the crime that we all know happened here this morning. Otherwise, I fear they'll continue to be emboldened and this will get worse, and next time someone will get hurt.
Police say they don't suspect terrorism. Do you buy that?
Well, it's not for me to do a running commentary on police. They should be allowed to conduct their investigation. But I absolutely understand why members of this synagogue, why members of this community fear exactly that has happened to them. That's exactly what they have feared would happen to them for the last 12 months. They've been living in a climate of fear. We need to do much more to support them to make sure this is a safe and secure country for everyone.
David, you're in Sydney this morning and decided to come back here. Can you explain why and your immediate reaction when you first heard it?
Well, I was on a plane about to go to Sydney and immediately came back here. And because we're a great community, this is a fantastic community, but at the same time, when these things happen, I mean, it's unprecedented. We've seen attacks like this on synagogues happen around the world. No one would expect that this would happen here in Melbourne. There is no question that since October 7, we have seen a huge rise in anti-Semitism, and there has been the fear, but unfortunately this has realised more than fear, but it's actually come out to play in the most horrible and horrific way. No one expected this. No one would ever expect that the community would have to deal with this, nor should they have to deal with this. And as James rightfully said today, no matter who you are and no matter what your background, you should be able to come and pray and do that in a respectful, peaceful way and know that you're safe to do that. This is a huge breakdown in what is social cohesion and every bit of the fabric of Melbourne. It is, if the government didn't know they had a problem before, well, wake up. There is a problem now. And we cannot allow this stuff to happen. We can't. The community needs more than words. They need reassurance that the government is actually going to act and do something. Because I think most people that I speak to are sick and tired of weasel words. They want action, they want consequences, and when those people targeted communities, whether it be the Jewish community or any other community, it is simply not on, and there needs to be consequences for that action.
Do you think there's the case for Parliament to come back early to consider the laws that have been proposed? State Parliament?
Look, whatever needs to happen, it needs to happen. The Premier needs to be out today and telling the community and all Victorians what is she going to do to ensure that people are safe in Victoria. What is she going to do to guarantee people's safety? That is the first job of any Premier or any Prime Minister, to guarantee the safety of their constituents. And that's what the government should be doing now. That should be the priority of the Premier, and I expect the Premier to come out today and tell us exactly what she is going to do to guarantee safety for the Jewish community and for every single Victorian. Because today it's a synagogue, tomorrow it could be a church, a mosque, who knows where. And simply, it is not good enough, and it's something that the government needs to step on before it's too late.
Mr. Burns, what would you say to people in the community? Oh, well,
his voice is gone.
I'm not his spokesman. Blame the Labor Party for appeasing the anti-Jewish sentiment, that Jew hatred, the mobs that were protesting last week outside of a synagogue. What would you say to people?
I don't think Josh is in a position to answer. I don't think Daniel's in a position to answer for him. What I do want to say is that there will be other shuls and synagogues in the area tonight contemplating Friday night prayers and wondering whether they're safe or not to do so. I think it's incumbent on the government and Victoria Police to provide all the necessary security to provide that reassurance that you can safely go about your faith and your worship in this state without any fear of consequences.
Do you think banning protests outside synagogues is a good start? Because we've seen 2 in the last week and this is a clear escalation.
It's astonishing to me that anybody thinks that it's a good idea to protest outside a synagogue or any other place of worship. It should not be tolerated in Australia that you can have a protest outside a synagogue, and unfortunately we have seen that many times over the last year. A year ago, Caulfield Shul, not far from here, was evacuated on Friday night on police advice because they feared for the safety of the occupants because of a menacing protest that was outside. Now, when that's allowed to happen, when there are no consequences for that, don't be surprised when people are emboldened. They become more extreme, not less, and we have events like we've seen this morning.
Daniel, can I ask you an extension of that question? So, I mean, every Sunday since October last year, we've had this sort of rolling protest in the middle of the city. It's always been angry. At times, it's been hateful. Do we have to have a serious consideration whether that has to come to an end? That is basically fueling the kind of sentiments that leads to this sort of attack.
So let me first identify who I am. Daniel Aggie on KC, President of the Executive Council of Australian Jury. The issue with the demonstrations and protests in the city is that they are disruptive and they are creating a climate of social dissent. And that's not a Jewish issue, that's a general issue. Go and ask the storekeepers in Swanston Street whether they want these protests on Sunday which are affecting their businesses. Go and ask the people who live and work around the CBD whether they're in favour of these protests, and they'll tell you they're not. From the Jewish community's perspective, I've heard from many people within the Jewish community that, quite frankly, don't go into the CBD on a Sunday. Or if they do, they will take their skull cap off. They will de-identify as Jews for fear that if they wear this in the central business district, they are at risk of being a target. Now, what kind of country have we come to be that a person cannot express their faith according to their religious law for fear that if they do so, they become a target? That's the issue that I have with the protests in the city on behalf of the Jewish community.
The question is, we're standing in front of a burnt-out city. So at what point do we say that enough is enough, that you can't have tolerance anymore for activities that just sow further hate and division?
Well, this is the problem. There's an old saying, and I think it was Justice Brandeis in the United States who said, freedom of speech does not give you the right to shout fire in a crowded theatre. When people talk about freedom of speech and the right to speak politically and the right to protest and demonstrate, there's a natural limit to it. And the natural limit is when it creates fear and lack of safety and risk for others. That's the natural limit. And we passed that limit a long time ago. And that's the reason why I say that the protests, there needs to be a permit system. The protests need to be brought to an end. I mean, the people who are organising them, I don't see how they could possibly think that it would be assisting their cause to anger Victorians, but that's what they're doing, and they are creating risk and they are creating fear.
Right. And do any of the politicians here, anyone willing to say that those protests should come to an end, that Sunday protest on Sunday?
I think that goes without saying. I mean, I think we've had enough. The fact that these protesters, we've got opportunities, as there should, on the steps of Parliament House for people to freely express their views. These people literally take over the city like it's theirs. And as we heard Daniel say, it's not just the Jewish community that have ultimately bear the brunt of this. You've got traders, you've got people that live in the city that have had to deal with it week in, week out. You can't simply have people not only protest, but the kind of insightful and hateful messaging that are with these protests. Some of the leaders, what they have said, that there has been no convictions to any of those, and we've had individuals that have said that we should be targeting Israel, Jews, the US on the United States Independence Day, build tunnels like they did in Israel. We've had people say that, and there's been no arrests and no consequences. So little wonder why we're seeing the kind of activation, because it's a free-for-all in Victoria. And that just should not happen. It should not happen. And ultimately, we've got to have a situation where you don't have one group that targets another without any kind of consequences. And ultimately, it's going to continue to happen. We've got move-on laws. They should be used. And there should be any laws necessary. If there needs more laws, let's get them. But let's not have excuses from a government. Now, let's not what we've seen for the last 12 months is the Premier blame Victoria Police saying we don't have enough powers. Enough of the blame game. Let's get some answers and let's ensure that there is safety for all Victorians, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from.
The protesters for a year have insisted that it's not about Jews, it's about Zionism. This is not a Zionist synagogue. Why do you think they attacked this synagogue?
Well, when people say globalise the intifada, I think this is what they mean. I think they mean bring the violence from the Middle East here in Australia, and we don't want that. And we have to send a very clear message as a country that it's not acceptable here, that we won't tolerate it here, that there'll be real consequences for people who have done these acts and who have incited these acts. And it is astonishing to me that there are still people who are selling stickers that are anti-Semitic in our CBD every weekend, that there are still people who think it's okay to protest outside a synagogue, that there are still people who think it's okay to wave the flag of a listed terrorist organisation in defiance of the law. But unfortunately, there are some people who feel that way because they haven't met the consequences of their actions over the last year. And until they do, we can expect to see more of this.
There were some comments overnight from the office of Benjamin Netanyahu about the Albanese government. Not to draw any links, but are you concerned about what they've said and given what happened in the UN in the last 48 hours?
Look, I've been very vocal about this for many months. I'm very concerned about the state of bilateral relations between Australia and Israel. Israel is, outside of the Five Eyes, one of our most important intelligence and security partners. There have been terrorist attacks in our country which have been thwarted by the assistance of Israeli intelligence, and I'm very concerned about the state of bilateral affairs when it comes to former ministers of Israeli governments being blocked from coming to our country, when it comes to our votes at the United Nations. I think that has damaged that relationship. It's an important relationship, and we should be stewarding it and protecting it, not trashing it.
And it invites people to do violence.
Do you think it's fair, a lot of the community is blaming the government for the escalation in anti-Semitism, the lack of conviction, the lack of actually doing something about it?
Well, again, I've been very clear on this. I think the governments, state and federal, should have been stronger earlier in confronting this problem. I think there should have been more moral clarity on these questions. I think there should be more law enforcement when it comes to these questions. And I am concerned that things will get worse until that happens. I think, though, we might have to leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, that is James Patterson, a number of members of the community there. That was a bipartisan show of support with Labor MP Josh Burns. Tim Wilson is also a former Liberal MP having another crack at the next election. We have a Victorian State MP there as well. This is one of those moments over the last more than year of this conflict that many in the Jewish community fear.